Greetings, and welcome back to the podcast. This episode, we are joined by Mr. Jeff Davison, 2025 Calgary Mayor candidate and Chief Executive Officer of the Prostate Cancer Centre, an Alberta-based health charity dedicated to providing clinical support, education, and resources to help men navigate the complex world of prostate cancer. Mr. Davison has spent over 20 years with publicly traded companies in the energy, technology, and creative services sectors, and was elected to Calgary City Council from 2017 until 2021. Mr. Davison is currently on the University of Calgary Board of Governors and Senate, and has previously served on the Board of Directors for Calgary Municipal Land Corporation, Calgary Economic Development, and the Opportunity Calgary Investment Fund. Mr. Davison earned a bachelor's degree in communication studies from the University of Calgary and also attended Cornell University for its strategy program in marketing. Among other things, we discussed the 2025 Calgary mayor election, unlocking economic development, and why it matters. This podcast episode is powered by ATB Capital Markets. ATB Capital Markets provides financial solutions and strategic advisory services to help businesses thrive. With a track record of successful deal execution, ATB is a full-service investment dealer with a deep understanding and commitment to the industries it serves. Visit atbcapitalmarkets.com for more information. This podcast episode is brought to you by Canada Action. Canada Action strongly believes that as long as the world needs oil and natural gas, it should be supplied by Canada, where the economic benefits support our Canadian families and social programs. Canada Action believes it's time to champion our energy sector to help build Canada up and get our national economy back on track. Learn more at canadaaction.ca. Good morning, Mr. Jeff Davison. Thank you very much for doing this. I really appreciate your time.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
For the listener, you are currently the CEO of the Prostate Cancer Centre, but you are also running for the Mayor of Calgary in 2025.
Both of those are correct, yeah.
You're also willing to do a podcast like this, which could be argued is good for your career. As an example, Danielle Smith did this podcast before she was elected, so you never know.
Well, hey, I'm all for it, so...
There's also clues on, number one, competency, and number two, transparency at times for people who are willing to do this kind of a open forum discussion. So thank you very much.
But listen, I think these are great conversations we're going to have. I think at the end of the day, the biggest issue we have in politics these days is trust. And the more we can get out and be transparent and have conversations together, whatever those conversations are about, I think is key.
I thought, as I mentioned, for the purposes of today's conversation, we could frame it around constructive conversation on the economy and how we could build up the city from an economic perspective, if that works for you.
Absolutely.
But to go back to the beginning, how did you get into politics and why?
Yeah, it's a long road. I mean, and why go back, I suppose, is part of that question. You know, spent the very first part of my career, probably 15, 20 years in oil and gas. In the midst of some of that down cycle around 2009, started a publicly traded tech company and decided to go after that for a while. And all through all of this have been involved in the film and television industry. And to get through a long story short, in 2017, there was an opening on City Council where I live and decided to stop griping about everything that me and my friends were mad about and try to do something about it.
2017 until 2021, You sat on Calgary City Council?
Yeah, one term.
Which ward were you representing, or part of the city?
Yeah, city councilor for Ward 6 on the west side of the city.
West side.
Yeah.
For the listener, when is the next Calgary mayor election? Maybe to start with the basics.
Sure. October 2025. So it's coming up.
So you have, 10 months or so to get out there and get your message out, more or less?
Yeah, I announced on October 10th that I would be seeking election as the next mayor of Calgary. And, you know, for me, it's about getting out ahead of this, right? I think probably some of the lessons learned from before are just you need time to introduce yourself to Calgarians. I'm not an elected official today. In fact, I'm working in healthcare, as we just introduced. Never really thought I would be considering this again. I look back to 3.5 years ago, having lost an election, you come out of that and life moves on, right? Had taken a job in healthcare and at the Prostate Cancer Centre and worked with Invest Alberta. And I think for a city like Calgary, we think a lot about how we often reward the incumbents. And so had no idea that a couple of years later, here's where we would be, given that often city council, they get in there, they're there for 8 to 12 years, and then maybe there'd be an opportunity down the road. But fortunate for me, I suppose, that opportunity came a lot faster.
So I guess the question is, why are you running for mayor again in 2025?
I look at where we are as a city right now, and to me, I'm born and raised here, which I don't think gives me any special privilege these days, but it does tell you that I understand where we've come from and where we need to go. I have 3 small kids that I want to have a good life here in Calgary. I want them to be safe. I want them to have future opportunities in their career here in a place like Calgary. Let's remember why 250 people a day move to Calgary, right? People see opportunity here. They see growth happening here, and we've got to manage that differently. And when I look at city council today, I think it has become very ideologically driven. I think it has not focused on the core basics that we need to focus on as a city. And having sort of a breadth of background in terms of different industries, I think will help manage the city on a go-forward basis. So experience matters.
If we were to agree on the premise that a strong economy is upstream of a healthy and vibrant city that takes care of all of its citizens, I think we could both agree on that. At least that's my perspective.
100%.
What are examples of policies that you're thinking about to make Calgary a better place to do business?
I think it's really setting the foundation for people to succeed. I think for a long time, the city has, and probably rightly so, been accused of getting in the way of people's success. And to me, whether that's crime happening downtown, whether that's taxes that are too high, all of those things need to be addressed if you want to have industry continue to grow in a place like Calgary. I think one of our biggest challenges that we've seen over the last really 6-7 years is the evacuation of our downtown, right? The biggest tax base that we have is downtown Calgary. And we're now at a point where we're watching and have watched for a number of years companies walk south of the border. Part of that has to do with the federal environment, I suppose, that has been set around energy. Part of that has to do with the high tax load of operating a city. So there's things we need to do there to right size that conversation around taxes to make sure that we become a jurisdiction that is seen as business friendly again.
If I'm correct, one of your ideas was to freeze property taxes for at least 4 years?
Yeah, like when you talk about affordability, I think often we think about the person sitting in their home, right? But it really is everybody. When you consider that in Calgary, the largest employer in our city by far is small business. And so when you start to think about the tax load that small businesses carried for the past, decade or more, that becomes challenging. And so freezing taxes isn't just about, the residential property tax side. It is that business tax side too. And part of that is freeze the taxes and let's look at how we right size things, right? And we'll come back to, how do you make a tax freeze work? But that is part of that overall affordability piece that doesn't just affect every citizen. It affects business owners as well.
It's a complex problem, the hollowing out of downtown Calgary, but from your perspective, are there a few things that you could work on that would have immediate results? Are there clear solutions to the problem?
The problem with downtowns is when you start to get into this problem, it really requires long-term strategy, right? And I think having a city council that has become very ideologically driven is not helpful. Energy, oil and gas has been, the biggest supporter of our downtown economy for the better part of the last 40 years. And to simply sort of cut the handoff that feeds you is wrong. So for me, it's about support for the energy industry and making sure that we continue to provide what we can do as a city to be beneficial to industry growing here again. But secondary to that is, where is technology taking us? What are the new things out there? And that doesn't mean we're at odds with oil and gas. It actually means, what are we doing in support of that? And so if you go back to my first time on council, one of the big things I had stood for was diversification of our economy. And that, again, it's not about division. It's about how do these things work together. And so a lot of the work we're starting to see that took off because I really believed Alberta could become an economic corridor between Calgary and Edmonton together. How do you get more tech companies focused on being here? And down the road now, because we had that vision and that has sort of carried through in terms of one government to another, we now have data centers, for instance, that are, moving here largely in part because they're supported by natural gas facilities that can power them. So it's looking at, what is your asset class that you have now, and how can you build upon that, whether that's growth of the sector itself or growth of new industry in support of that?
To what degree do you think leadership at the top affects the mood of the city, where it sounds kind of cliche, but you need someone in charge, so to speak, that's supporting the economy and really encouraging entrepreneurship? Do you think that it's important for the mayor to be seen out and about and supporting entrepreneurs and businesses downtown?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that your job as the mayor is to champion everything in your city. And, again, when we talk about this sort of ideology that council has these days, they've forgotten who we are and where we come from. And that's not right. I mean, for me, it's about standing up and supporting where we can an energy industry that has helped build this city. It is stepping up to support the small business owner and making sure, whether that's through tax or just supporting local. Like Christmas is a great time of year to talk about, why we should support local, in particular when, we're in and out of a mail strike. All of those things matter when you're the mayor. Your job isn't to continue to divide people and make it harder for people. Your job is to be everybody's mayor and where and when champion the things that they're asking you to do. And one of those big things right now is that we don't have a voice for small business. We don't have a voice for industry, and we don't have a vision for growth. And that's going to change.
For example, some people might say your job is the CEO of the city, and it helps to be down and amongst the people going to events, even if it's downtown, where one might not think that the leadership matters, but
it does.
You're the CEO.
And you're right. You set the tone for the city, right? And, I think for a long time in politics, we've seen where it's a lot of talking down to citizens. It's a lot of, I know better than you. And I think people are really tired of that, right? When you have big public hearings of people coming out in record numbers to say, please don't do this, and a city council or a government does it anyway, that's really challenging, right? And that's that part of transparency and trust we talked about. It's when you have a lack of trust, you don't have support for government. And I think one of the biggest challenges that I'm going to inherit is rebuilding trust with citizens.
Doing podcasts like this is the first step.
Well, I hope so.
Like we mentioned, the traditional energy industry has been the bedrock of the city's growth and the province's growth, maybe Canada's growth as well. But there are new sectors like technology and real estate developing within Calgary. How do you promote a multi-pronged economic growth with all the industries?
Just as I've been doing. I mean, I think that's really, I go back to my first term on council. That's what we set out to do. I think the difference being that when you're a city councillor, it is relatively hard to get the attention, in particular when your federal government's fighting against something or your provincial government isn't aligned at the time. As the mayor, you wield a pretty big stick. And it's a pretty big stick that I intend to champion business in this city, right? I mean, it matters to everybody. When you see right now, Calgary is sitting at record high unemployment. In fact, we have the highest unemployment rate across the country of all the major cities. That's a challenge for me, right? We continue to see 240, 250 people a day move to Calgary. We're going to continue to see that. How are we going to manage growth? How are we going to ensure that more businesses are setting up here, that are operating here, that are growing here to support all of these individuals who frankly are coming here for a better way of life to say, I want opportunity. I want to work. We've got to work pretty quickly to set that environment up so that those folks can succeed.
Sometimes the best way to approach a budget is the things you don't spend money on. When you're looking at the budget of the city, what has been something that you would point to as an inefficient use of the money, and how do you plan to direct the budget towards positive economic projects for the city?
I think the biggest inefficiency, and I mean, I can go through many of them, but I would say the climate emergency. Roughly $72 million a year in that budget going towards new people in every single department that are just focused in and around climate challenges. It's not to say that climate isn't important, but it is to say, what's our role in climate, right? And what can we do as a city that we can do better? And so to me, when you look at, let's look at the difference between Calgary and Edmonton for a second. You look at the budgets this year. Edmonton has 2/3 of the roadways that Calgary has, and they put about $120 million budget to their roads. Calgary put $40 million. And now that 38% of our roads are starting into deteriorating condition, that's a big problem for a city that's growing the way we are, in particular because we're a logistical hub, an inland port, if you will. So we've got to do better to move people around our city. And, when we're focused on climate, yet we're causing traffic jams and we're causing, our roadways to be jammed up because we're not managing that growth properly. Well, which problem are we trying to solve, right? And to me, I don't look at it like a climate emergency. I suppose I look at it as a climate opportunity. Where are the opportunities we can go down the path of as a city that are in partnership with our provincial and federal counterparts to make sure that we can be effective, set KPIs. Let's actually, if we're going to go out and do something, try to achieve something. And I haven't to this day seen or heard of what those key performance indicators are for anything related to climate in the city.
How do you make sure there's accountability? For right now, there is no accountability on those issues.
Yeah. Well, your council is supposed to be the accountability piece, but when it's council itself that's making the bad decisions, that's the hard part, right? I mean, I think I look at it in terms of why does experience matter so much in this election? Well, it's a $5 billion a year corporation, the city of Calgary. If you don't have experience from your leaders at the top who can align culture, who can align value, who can align vision, who can put a strategic plan together for the city over the next 4 years, well, what do you hope to achieve, right? We've got lots of great people at the city of Calgary that are spinning right now because they're not really sure what the mandate is. They're not really sure what they've been directed to do because there's no clear and concise language that has come from city council. In fact, it's the opposite, right? There's confusing messages. There's conflicting policies. All of those things have to change if we're going to operate efficiently as a city.
Sometimes the job of a leader is to prevent problems, but a lot of times the credit when you prevent a problem isn't acknowledged. It's what you prevented things from happening. And for example, the infrastructure of the city that's been having a lot of problems, if somebody had taken the time a few years ago to maybe upgrade the infrastructure, they wouldn't have got the credit, but we wouldn't have had the problems. Do you view it that way?
Or at least deal with the problem in the right manner. I mean, I've never heard any member of council stand up and say, what's the fix? How much will it cost? And when will it be done? They continue to band-aid the problems. And again, if we want to talk about a city that is growing rapidly, we have to start dealing with our infrastructure base right now to make sure that we can manage that growth properly. And I don't think anybody on council has done that. And you're right. It's not a new building. It's not a downtown sexy feature that everybody looks at. This campaign is about getting back to basics because that's where we failed. We failed to manage the foundation of the house, and now the house is starting to crumble.
Sometimes there's no political points. And your job is, as a politician, to be out and seen, but yet you need to take care of the foundation.
Well, and at a point where we're debating running water in our city, we've failed, right? This should never be a problem within the city of Calgary. And, when you go back and you look over the last couple of years, how budgets have been eroded, how maintenance has been throttled back on certain pieces of infrastructure, well, you wonder why water pipes are failing and roads are crumbling and nobody's addressing the potholes and we pulled the snow and ice control. So for a city that talks about being accessible, for a city that wants people walking in their communities, well, you can't do that because nobody's shoveling the walkways, right? So it's managing your core assets differently and better to provide better value to citizens.
Another critique of elected officials is sometimes they're not in it for the right reasons. The leader of the city deserves to be compensated well, but at times the criticism is that certain leaders are clearly just in it for the money. How do you address that to make sure that your incentives are aligned with the city's financially?
I think there's a couple of issues there. I think, we often sit back and we wonder, why is it so hard to get good people to run for elected office? And part of that is the opportunity. And I will say I'm incredibly thankful to my board at the Prostate Cancer Centre who, I sort of went back to them and I said, I'm not asking you to support me as the candidate. I'm asking you to support the process by which we allow opportunity for good people to run for public office. And so I commend them on just being able to say, look, we'll manage through all of this. We've got a great succession plan in place. We'll get there. But for a lot of these people that have been elected, and I think, over history that has shown, this is the best job they'll ever have. And to me, if you're there on the sole basis of compensation, you're not there for the right reasons.
Exactly.
I mean, you look at right now the federal government, let's take, and here you have a federal Liberal Party that knows they're coming out of government. The vast majority of them understand they're going to lose their seats. And the general public sits back and we wonder, well, why aren't they getting along with an election here? Why aren't we moving this down the path? Well, all these people are going to lose their jobs, and they're the people in charge of calling that next election. They know they're going to lose, but why not take the paycheck for the next year to figure out where they're going to go from here? It's why you've seen a number of federal Liberal ministers step down and say, well, I'm not seeking re-election. Number one, they don't want to lose. And number two, they're starting to look for opportunities to get them out of public life right now. So that does become your challenge in politics, right? And, at the federal and provincial levels, the compensation is much higher. The threshold to get in is much higher. At the city level, I think as citizens, we have to do better ourselves to vet the candidates that are in front of us, to understand who these folks are, what their background is, and what they plan to do for us over the next 4 years.
You could argue the city is a large company, sort of, in a roughly speaking, so you deserve to be compensated well, but within reason.
Fair compensation, right? I think, and that's where I think, I would look at, I know we have often these reviews where, city council will approve a pay raise for themselves and give themselves a nice pat on the back. I would look more at a system where we say, what's the total compensation package for the next 4 years? So at the mid-cycle review, we're in line with inflation and we can make adjustments there. But for the vast majority of it, it's a fixed term contract for the 4 years. This is what you get to do this job, period, full stop. We'll look at raises down the path and we'll figure that out. But whether you're there for 20 years or 2 years, you get paid the same. That's also part of that.
Why do you think it's been hard to attract good candidates to politics?
X is a good example. I mean, I think when you put your name out there, you put your name out there, and good, bad, or otherwise.
It's a tough job.
It's a tough job, right? I mean, you're highly scrutinized on social media where I think, the keyboard warriors come out, and frankly, nobody's interested in having a conversation on social media. It doesn't matter what you say. You're either accused of not engaging or you're accused of doing something wrong. And to a lot of people, it's not about skeletons in the closet. Why put yourself through that? It takes pretty thick skin to be a politician these days at any level, right? And, when you have people protesting outside your home and you have things going on that affect your personal life and your family, those are tough things for people to go through. And, no matter what, I would say it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're Prime Minister Trudeau and you're very disliked or you're sort of the most positive politician in the province. People don't deserve that. People deserve to be treated fairly. And if you've got a problem with the job, don't bring people's kids and families into it. And we've seen that. That's happened to me. It's not fun when it happens, but it also tells you that this is worth fighting for if they're coming after you in that manner.
This podcast episode is sponsored by Conate Water Solutions. Do you need cost-effective water sourcing options to supply your next drilling or completions program? Conate Water Solutions is a specialized hydrogeology company focused on water well drilling, testing, and water management services in Western Canada and Texas. Contact info@conatewater.com or check out conatewater.com for more details. This podcast episode is brought to you by the Canadian Energy Executive Association, or CEA for short. For over 70 years, CEA has been bringing together energy executives, Indigenous leaders, and policymakers to foster collaboration and shape the future of Canada's energy industry through a series of business conferences, exclusive networking events, and community initiatives. CEA provides opportunities to connect, innovate, and drive meaningful progress. Learn more at energyexecs.ca. Things are changing in the States with a new administration and a reluctance from the Canadian federal government to extend the olive branch. As the CEO of a city that represents large energy interests across the border, do you feel there's a role for you to play I don't know what you call it, but
it's
to help relations?
It's influence, right? I mean, again, your job is to work with everybody, right? I mean, you get elected as the mayor of Calgary. Who knows what happens provincially or federally? Things will change in your term no matter what, whether that's leadership changes or whether that's party changes. As the mayor, your job is to work for the citizens of this city to get the best deal we can with our partners at the province and the federal government. Part of that, though, is also the influence you can have in working with those teams to say, there's got to be a way of changing the conversation. And I think we've seen a real lack of partnership developed by City Council, which is why I think, the province has stepped into a lot of the major projects and sort of right-sized the decision-making because they've had to in the absence of good decision-making, I would say. But I would look at it very much like part of our job as City Council and as the mayor of this city, in particular with the industry we have, is to champion it and when and where needed, go on the road and help tell that story globally. The City of Calgary could be argued as a small cog in the big economic wheel, but there are leaders that come through the city that might appreciate a warm welcome from the mayor. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. No, and I mean, and that's the thing. I think Calgary for a long time has been on the global stage, right? And I do believe we're a world-class city. I do believe that we can do good things in our city and that we build cool stuff, but we also take care of citizens. It's attracting people here that is really going to continue to help build the economy. You want these people to come to Calgary. You want them to feel good about Calgary. You want them to invest in Calgary. You don't do that by attacking global leaders and, using ideology to put up fences, right? Your job is to build relationships and make those relationships work.
One of those things is making sure citizens feel safe and visitors in the city. How do you address that from an economic standpoint? Is it just making sure the resources are there to make sure things are safe? How do you think about that?
Public safety is part and parcel to why people want to look at your city for investment, or why people want to continue to invest in your city, or why people want to be employed in certain areas of the city. Let's take the downtown right now. And I think you and I talked offline a little bit about this. When I was with Invest Alberta, it was always interesting bringing people into the province to look at what Alberta has to offer. And you take them to a place like Edmonton right now, which I think we could all agree has significant social disorder issues in their downtown. You look at that downtown and you ask people to invest there, it's a pretty hard sell. You look at Calgary and they would go, well, this seems like the place where things are happening. This seems like where we want to put our money. And in working on the campaign now, the biggest challenge I think we have, cut 2-3 years later, is that I had a former police chief tell me this, and I really believe what he said. He said, Edmonton has lost their downtown for the next 30 years. It's going to be very difficult to get it back with the level of social disorder going on down there. Calgary's inches away from it. And if we don't start to fix this problem rapidly, it's going to get away on us all over again. And so when you look at the growth profile of Calgary, when you look at how we want to diversify our economy, whether that's through tech or trade or all of the things that we want to be happening here in Calgary, when you talk to the post-secondaries who are trying to educate the people that will go into the jobs that we're trying to create, it all comes back to public safety. If people don't feel safe in a jurisdiction, they're not going to invest there. And so for us, it's about right-sizing the amount of police we have in our city. Calgary right now has the lowest officer to citizen ratio per capita amongst any of the major North American cities. So that's first and foremost what we have to do. It's stepping up crime patrol on the trains and transit to make sure people are getting to work safe, not just when they get downtown. It's looking at how do we get people back into the shelters. Right now, we're sitting at about 2,700 people on the streets. We have shelter in place for all of those people. And so I think it's then looking at how do you deal with addiction and recovery. And again, ideologically speaking, whatever is going on between the city and province now isn't working. We have to build that relationship. We have to work together on health. Healthcare is not the city of Calgary's business. It is the provincial and federal government's business. And so building the advocacy to them to say, look, we need new programs, we need funding. Here's the things we think we need to do to help people recover and get them off the street is key to cleaning up the downtown.
Which is paid for by the development of a strong economy.
Absolutely.
As we discussed.
Right. It's, when you want to pave the roads and you want to make things happen in your city, a lot of that comes from tax dollars, right? If you don't have people investing in Calgary to create new tax base, how do you expect to build those things? And how do you expect to move the needle on growth?
Products, goods, and services don't come from nowhere. You need people to invest the money, go to work every day, and create the jobs and the products to sell to create the taxes to pay for public safety.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you think that message has been lost at times?
Yes.
In municipal politics?
Yeah, 100%. I think what we've seen is people getting cute about telling the police when and where not to do their jobs. Our job as city council is to ensure the police have the tools to do their job, that they're resourced effectively, and that they're able to police in a fair and consistent way. I think the biggest challenge we've seen when it comes to, the effect on small business, the effect on our downtown, really through crime, is that you've got a city council that has told the police to pick and choose where they should do their jobs. And that's wrong, right? Our job isn't to tell the police to do anything. Our job is to resource them and say, I need help cleaning up the streets. What do you need to do it? And that's how we're going to do it, right? It's going to be money, right? Again, when you have the lowest amount of officers per capita on the street, when you're getting in the way of police doing their job, and it's a challenge, right? Police are just as frustrated, right? I think police morale right now is at an all-time low. They're tired of arresting the same people over and over and over again. They're tired of having to go back and give Narcan to the same person 5 times a night. They're tired of the public booing them we have to champion our police in this city, and we have to turn that around. When push comes to shove and people are at their worst moment and need support, who do they call? They call the police, right? They call frontline workers. We have to support those people.
And compensated.
And compensate them, right? I mean, the job has changed, right? The job is, it's much different than it was even 10 years ago. Social disorder and dealing with the amount of drugs on the street and how those drugs have changed and what that does to the mental state of the people using those drugs, it's a night and day difference of what it was 10 years ago. So it tells you that we need to start listening to police and doing our jobs differently. And we need to support them in the things they're asking for. A lot of that, when it does come to frontline workers, is also supporting them on the mental health side, right? There's a lot of significant PTSD that I would say frontline workers have because of the significant increase to the trauma they're seeing on the streets.
Another issue within Calgary and all the big cities in Canada is affordability with housing. There's some great real estate companies in Calgary that are doing their best to expand supply, but it's a tricky problem. How do you think about that? And how do you address housing affordability within Calgary?
Yeah, I mean, I'm 100% against this blanket rezoning. I think it's nonsense to go down the path of building 4 units at a time. And I go back to my time on council. I look at Ward 6, Springbank Hill, West District, Trinity's project at Winsport. All 3 of those projects will add 35,000 units in a new community setting within existing communities. That's how you build base, right? Our job is not to throttle off development. Our job is to set the foundation to move development quickly. And quite frankly, I think the housing crisis we're in, the affordability issues we're seeing are all self-inflicted. I think council's job has gotten in the way of development. And again, picking and choosing where they want to apply different rules. You have to be able to set things fairly and consistently. And you need to understand that time is money in the development industry. And so we need to think about transit-oriented development better. We need to build high-density projects along places that make sense. Greenfield development has to happen. Calgary is growing too rapidly to ignore it. And I know there's a lot of people that would say, well, we've got to stop the sprawl. But the reality is new communities pay for themselves. New communities have mixed use built in. They're built totally different than communities of 60 years ago were. We have to start to think about our downtown and how do we get more residential units downtown, which again comes back to that whole no one wants to invest here if you're not going to clean up the crime. But it also has to do with consistency of a city. Right now, I think a lot of development is throttling back. You've got a city council that has effectively tripled the planning budget, tripled the amount of people in that department, and it's taking 3 to 4 times longer to get development permits. So, again, the red tape is costing development money. They're going to look to go other places because nobody can afford the carrying costs in that world anymore. The other thing is having a vision and sticking to it. So do what you say you're going to do. And some of the city's problem right now is that you've got, in particular in the downtown core, significant amounts of investment that have made in the core along 2nd Street because people thought the Green Line was coming. And all of a sudden when City Council showed up and said, hey, we're not going through the downtown and we're not getting across 2nd anymore. Well, there's a lot of those big investment firms that have put billions of dollars into the downtown core, betting on the fact that Calgary was going to do what they said they're going to do. And then they 180'd on them. If you don't sort of set the terms of consistency and fairness for investment to take place, it'll go elsewhere. And Calgary's starting to be seen as that city that doesn't do what they say they're going to do. And that's got to change.
The recent bylaw on zoning.
Yeah, the blanket rezoning.
Unpopular in Calgary, to say the least. Is it possible to change that law if you become mayor?
Yeah, and day one, we're planning on rolling that back. And I think that's where the party system comes into effect with the next election here in City Council. We're putting together candidates that believe in the same things we believe in. We believe in public safety and affordability and infrastructure. I believe that we can do a tax freeze and make our money work for us rather than working for our money. I believe that we can roll back the blanket rezoning. It just takes having a council of 8 like-minded individuals to go and get it done.
The critique is that council didn't listen to the citizens of Calgary. Mm-hmm. Why is it important to listen to your electorate?
Well, if you want to get reelected, I suppose that's a good first start, right? But that's why you're there. You're not there to come up with your own ideology and make plays on things. You're there to be a representative of the citizens. And I think a lot of people have forgotten that. And I think a lot of people, and the blanket rezoning was a great example of, again, where we're tired of being told what's best for us by the politicians. They work for us, not the other way around. And when you have the largest public hearing in Calgary's history of which 80+% of people showed up and said, please don't do this. This is not good for us. We're asking you to listen. We're asking you not to go down this path. Not one member of council changed their vote going into that public hearing and coming out of it. It was all pre-prescribed. They all knew how they were going to vote. And again, it all led back to the ideology of this city council. We know better than you, and this is best for you. It's got to change. And again, I keep harping on this idea of trust and why we don't have trust in government anymore. It's examples like that. It's as simple as things like the bag bylaw that we saw last year in Calgary, right? Again, you had people say, please don't do this. City council goes and does it. There's an uproar of people. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, that was a bad idea. We should undo that. But the damage is already done because you could have just listened to us at the beginning. You chose not to. You chose to wag your finger at us and blame us and say, you know better. Well, what did that get you? It got you a lot of mistrust with the public. And to me, you lose trust with the public. I understand there will be city councillors that seek re-election. I don't think any of them deserve to be there. I understand that some city councillors may want to run for mayor. I don't think any of them deserve a promotion. I think we need a clean sweep. And I think for the first time in Calgary's history, it's likely to happen.
It's not mob rule, but on the other hand, the point of elected officials to represent the interests of your citizens. That's by definition what the point is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a common theme for a new elected official to say you're going to clean house and make a change.
Drain the swamp. Yeah.
However, that's an age-old tactic. How do you balance that with the realities of a large corporation, if you will, and things aren't always easy to change?
Number one, have a strategic plan with your council. What is it that we want to achieve in the next 4 years? And setting that table for me is the tax freeze. It is an investment in police. It is dealing with our infrastructure challenges. Part of that then is your job as mayor isn't just to be there for the citizens of this city. You've got to lead the cultural change at the city of Calgary itself.
Lead by example.
Exactly. Right. And, we need a mayor who can step up and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's the plan for the next 4 years. And here's how we're going to get people excited about that.
The Green Line. It's a good idea, more or less, but the current project is too expensive.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? How does the Green Line, or maybe it isn't a good idea. How do you approach that subject?
Green Line's a hard one. I mean, I go back to my first term on council. I helped set up the Green Line committee. I helped put a board in place that could manage this thing. I think the hard part with Calgary City Council is that we're not the experts in anything, right? We're the elected body that gets to make decisions. The one thing I've seen consistently over the last few years in our city is ignoring the experts we do have in our city. So from the get-go, we need to start better engaging with industry people that can help us with these big challenges. And so when I got to the city, saw what was going on with Green Line, we were talking about community gardens and nobody had told me where the track was even going to be. It's about setting the expectation of what is the project, what's the scope, and what do we need to do to keep it aligned, keep it on track, so to speak, no pun intended. So we put a committee in place, put a board together of experts who have done large scale infrastructure projects before that we could lean on for advice, because city council is not good at making, a $6.5 billion decision on how we're going to build a train line. Do we need it? Absolutely. We are a growing city. Do we know the ridership numbers right now? No. Do we know the costs right now? Not really. The challenge we have is that it's tough because we want to make the project work.
It has to be affordable.
But it has to be affordable. And so I go back to 2019, 2020. I mean, effectively what the province has pitched now is exactly what I said we should do back then. I did a little bit different. I sort of said focused on City Hall South, split the line, and there's probably an easier way we can manage our cost control on this. Not to say we won't somehow get across the downtown and into North Central Calgary. I believe we can do all of those things. But you have to phase a project like this, right? And we have to be able to start somewhere. And so I'm encouraged that we're going to start the project. I hope that's where the province is going. I don't know whether or not City Council is going to support the new alignment that the province has come up with. The bigger challenge is, what are the sunk costs, right? What are the things that we don't know? And so until we understand that, we won't know if economically this is going to make sense. Is there a need? Yes, of course there is. But a train line at all costs, we can't go down that path. There's better uses of our money over the short term than, mismanaging $5.5 billion worth of funds.
How does it get to that point? Why?
I don't know. I mean, I think again, because you don't treat a partner as a partner, right? Like I think the city of Calgary for a long time has sort of said, we're doing this. This is our thing, but have forgotten that the province and the federal government are all at the table with them saying, well, you did take $1.5 billion of our dollars to put into this project too. And so I think it was a failure to sort of governments to work hand in hand with one another to achieve a goal. And I think it's because everybody had different goals. And the biggest problem you have is when you don't have an aligned vision or goal from the beginning, how do you anticipate managing that? And as governments changed and as this project delayed and delayed and delayed, that scope creep happened, right? The vision changed. Well, now we're not doing this, we're doing this, and now we're going to do this. And now this is, when you start moving the goalpost on people, you start to lose control of the vision. And when you lose the vision, you lose your partners. And when you lose your partners, you end up exactly where we are right now.
Time slippage is another
time
thing.
slippage.
How do you create a sense of urgency within City Council to make sure this has to get done now?
It's focusing and managing your team. And from high level perspective, again, you set the agenda as the mayor. So set the agenda.
Get to work.
And get to work. Resource it. Work with the people behind the scenes. Set the culture. Set the goals. Get moving on the project. And again, I go back to like this conversation I remember having one of my first days in City Council when we were talking about the Green Line. This is back in like 2017, 2018. And I go, oh, we should talk about these community gardens. And you stand up and you say, but nobody can tell me where the train's actually going. Like fundamentally, we've got to move people with this train. We can talk about what it looks like down the road. But if we don't know where the train is going, we're focused on the wrong thing. And so it's making sure that you put focus to things. So I stood up the Green Line committee. I said, there's a serious lack of focus running different aspects of the Green Line through City Council in different directions. This deserves its own committee. It's the largest infrastructure project the city's ever going to take on. Get focused, folks. Put people on this committee, bring in our resources from the outside, and help us manage this thing, down the line. And that was the path we were on. It just took too long to do.
This episode is brought to you by Upgrade Labs. Upgrade Labs offers a comprehensive range of cutting-edge performance and recovery services that have been proven to optimize your health in minutes, not hours. Whether it's accelerating muscle mass and bone density or addressing injury and inflammation, start your experience by booking a free cell health analysis at upgradelabs.com/Calgary. This podcast is brought to you by Energy United. Energy United is an organization with a mission to promote practical energy policy across Canada. Energy United is building a community of Canadians that are passionate about Canada's natural gas and oil industry and are willing to take action. Energy United is driving change on issues that matter, all the way from the carbon tax to the emissions cap. Join Energy United to make a difference at energyunited.ca. The new arena and the event centers had support from large investors and members in the community. But another worry is that, again, it'll take forever. How do you make sure that center gets developed on time?
Yeah, I mean, again, when I was elected back in 2017, one of the promises I made is that I would get the new event center back on the table. Talks had broken down between the city and Calgary Sport and Entertainment Corporation. Late 2017, I wrote a letter to Ken King and I said, I'd like to have a conversation about this and where we can go. I believe our city needs it. I believe the new event center will be a key to developing the entertainment and cultural district. I see value in how we can build tax base off anchoring an event center in this community. I thought we put together a great deal. We had a signed agreement. We capped the city's investment at $287 million, and it all fell apart because of ideology, right? Again, you moved the goalpost on some pretty significant players in how we were going to put a deal together. And I look at the deal now and I think this is a terrible deal. Like I remember Ken King walking into the room the very first day of our negotiations. He slapped some paper on the table and he goes, "Give me Edmonton's deal and I'll sign it right now." And he laughed and he walked out of the room. I was like, that was the first conversation? Like what? We worked pretty hard to get a deal for Calgarians where we got our money back, where we right-sized the investment, where we made it work for everybody. And, to kind of walk in as a city and just say, well, no matter what, we'll balloon the budget to $1.2 billion and we'll pay for the whole thing. And don't worry, taxpayers, we've got this. Well, you haven't exactly built trust with me on some of these other projects. How the hell are you going to manage this one? And so it's a challenge. Do I believe our city needs it? Absolutely. Would I get in the way of it? No. I think the sooner the better at this point, right? Every minute of delay, costs go up. And as a city, we need to be able to stand by the fact that we're going to do what we say we're going to do, and it's going to be on time and on budget. And I think this city council needs a lesson in that.
How important is it to work with the influential investors that are supporting the project?
It's incredibly important, right? I mean, I think it's why we worked with those parties when we got the original deal signed. It's why we worked so hard to not say, look, it can't all be one side or the other. We have to form a real partnership here. Here's the things we need to get this thing down the line. It's incredibly important. And you look at those people and you look at what they've built in this city. You look at the employment base they've created in this city. You look at the philanthropic work they've done in this city. Right. I mean, it's funny to me because I think a lot of people look at it and say, well, you know, they're giving millions to billionaires or whatever talking point has come up. And I always say to people, I've got, you know, my youngest child has health challenges. We're at the children's hospital all the time. And for all of those people that believe that this is some sort of get by these folks to the city of Calgary, come walk down the main hallway at the children's hospital with me, because the people you're talking about put that building together and they give back to the community. I see it every day at the Prostate Cancer Centre. The captains of industry, everybody is affected by health challenges the same. And without the people that were able to build corporations in our city and employ the thousands and tens of thousands of people that they do employ and then give back, Calgary is a very unique place. I mean, I raise money in Calgary and Edmonton, and I can tell you it's like night and day. Edmonton doesn't have what Calgary has. Calgary's philanthropic community is because this city was built by people who care. It was built by people that out of nowhere built an opportunity here and were successful, and they want to make sure that other people are successful too. So it's an incredibly important conversation to make sure that we work with those people, not against them.
You need to protect the interests of the city, but on the other hand, capital is mobile, and large investors and supporters have options.
Yep.
They don't have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing, I go back to the arena deal. You know, one of the biggest things I think that we had in my original deal that I haven't seen anything about now is we had $75 million for amateur sport, $75 million for young female hockey in our city, $75 million for all those kids that can't afford to play soccer even. $75 million is a lot of money to give back to amateur sport. And when you start to sort of villainize the people that are writing those checks and you fail to talk about the impact it'll have on the everyday citizen, well, that's wrong, right? And that's what I talk about when I talk about growing up in Calgary and being from Calgary, born and raised. It's because you understand who helped build this city. And it's okay to embrace that as we forge forward. And that's not what's being done right now.
What do you think the opportunity cost is on not having a world-class event center? Because sports and entertainment is actually a big business and can bring in revenues for the city.
Well, the phenomenon, I would say, of Taylor Swift has brought that front and center to even the average person, understanding that you look at the economic uplift of Taylor Swift walking into your city and performing a couple nights. I mean, it's an incredible thing. And that's just one artist. And so for a city like Calgary, where the vast majority of talent passes us over, if they're going to Rogers Place, they're going other places, we've got to start capitalizing on that, right? And that's what, I think a lot of people originally looked at the event center like, oh, it's a hockey rink. It's not. It's an event center. It's a place of gathering. It's a place where we can all take pride, whether you're in the building or out. It's looking at what's the uplift you create in a city, and just even that from a vibe perspective, when you have good things going on in your city. And I mean, the average grandfather who's never listened to a Taylor Swift record was going, well, that Taylor Swift's here. Look at all the craziness that's going on, right? That's what you want, right? You want to create that sort of essence of who Calgary is and what we can be and attract those top talent pieces here. Stop giving it to Edmonton. Who knew that Edmonton would have a hockey rink and running water, hey?
Kudos to Edmonton.
Kudos to Edmonton.
Top athletes, too, want to play at an arena that is world-class to help the Flames win, which is also good for the economy ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah.
You ran in 2021 but weren't successful. If you were to look back on things and do maybe a post-mortem, how do you approach that? What are you looking to do better this time around?
By the time I announced last time, there was a lot of people in market. And I think obviously coming out of COVID, the environment was very, very different than it is today. For me, I think that's why I wanted to be first to announce this time that I'm running for mayor, and we were. I look back and I think some of the people running last time had sort of that 35% of the market. but it became a vote against those people. You can't just say no to everything and consistently want to ask for their support in getting things done for your city. And so I think by way of having the current mayor, she was out early, people were looking elsewhere. And probably by the time I announced that I was coming in, they'd already made up their mind who they were voting for. And so that's why, again, go early this time, rebuild who I am, rebuild and introduce myself to Calgarians again, and talk about what we think the next 4 years is going to look like. 3.5 years ago, I didn't think we'd be here. I thought this council would have sort of a honeymoon 8 years, and, we'll talk about it maybe down the road. I'd moved on with my life and, cut to a climate emergency, a arena deal falling apart, bag bylaws, blanket rezoning, all of those things that just eroded that trust. People stood up and said, what we bought isn't what we want, and now we need to change.
On the subject of listening to people, how important is it to get the input from people who have led industry and are used to making capital allocation decisions and management decisions and have been there? Do you view it as a two-way conversation from the leaders of industry to get valuable feedback?
Yeah. And in fact, want to formalize things like that, right? We always talk about this idea. I think Lougheed back in the day had a kitchen cabinet, he called it, just those people in industry he could phone and rely on once a month to kind of give him the what's what of what's happening out there. And to me, I want to formalize that. I think, again, this city has been built by great Calgarians, and we need them at the table to help us fix the problems that we have today. And we've got a lot of great experience and a lot of great leadership and people who genuinely want to see our city succeed and people in our city succeed. Involve them in the conversation, and good things can happen.
You also need to listen to Main Street, however, people who don't necessarily lead a big company, but nevertheless, their opinions is important. How do you reach everybody else to make sure everyone's represented? Yeah,
it's a big challenge, in particular in the current political environment we're in. I think, how do you ensure that everybody has a voice? How do you ensure that you're hearing everybody? How do you ensure that you're even reaching the people you need to reach? I mean, you look at Calgary, we've become a very diverse city. And so how do you localize some of that messaging to ensure that you're having that conversation with everybody? Because I can tell you, you go back to public safety. Every single person I talk to in the Northeast cares about the same thing everybody else in Calgary does: public safety, right? They care that their kids are safe going to school. They care that we're getting the drugs off the street. They're tired of the gun violence. They're tired of the gangs. They're tired of the social disorder. We all have a lot more in common than we do in terms of differences. And we have to recognize that about that, right? And just because we've become a diverse city does not mean that we don't have commonality in the things that we want to achieve. And that's where I think getting back to basics in this campaign will really set that foundation for success. We all care about running water. We all care about our public safety. We all care that, we can afford to live here in Calgary, because the challenge really is, when you look at a lot of folks, multi-generational families in our city, people are working 4 and 5 part-time jobs just to keep people in the house. That's not what Calgary used to be. We're seeing record amounts of young people who, after getting an undergrad or sometimes a master's degree, they're moving back in with mom and dad because they can't get a mortgage. These are big challenges that we have to kind of right size.
One of the common attractions to Calgary, shared by everyone, is that it's an economic hub with opportunity, kind of a meritocratic society, celebrates entrepreneurs. Yeah. How do you foster that environment? How do you keep that going?
It's kind of what I've always done. When I was elected, right? It's working with the economic agencies and understanding, what are the new growth sectors we need to be focused on. It's working with the post-secondaries to say, are we in alignment with where the growth is and what we're training the workforce to be? Are we a jurisdiction that is a favored tax jurisdiction that's attracting businesses here and retaining businesses, which is an even bigger piece of that? It's all of those things coming together. And then you take that and you move it across multiple industries, right? You've got to set that base to work for everybody. And when you do that, then you start to see the benefits. And I think back in my first term on council, we set a lot of that infrastructure in place, and we're just now starting to see the results of that. You have to keep your foot on the accelerator. You have to never take competition for granted, whether that's running for public office or, how you're competing with other jurisdictions for business in your city. You got to keep your foot on the accelerator and continue to not ease off on the fact that we want to be the best and we're going to be the best.
Doing podcasts is one way to get the message out, but how do you get the message out that Calgary is open for business? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I've thankfully got a lot of smart people on the campaign that will help us get that messaging out, right? I mean, I think it's easy once you're the mayor to say, okay, now you've got a soapbox to stand on. It's hard to get people's attention right now. And so the utilization of social media, traditional media isn't what it used to be. And so a lot of people aren't paying attention there. It's challenging to get messaging out when, we're looking at 7-second clips on TikTok, right? So it's all of those things, but it's also word of mouth. And I think the biggest thing that we've got to do in this election is ensure that people have a reason to vote, because last election we saw a record low turnout, and not just have a reason to go themselves and vote, talk to their families about who they're voting for, talking to their friends about why they're voting for those people, talking to people in their community about what the values they have for our city and what they want to see are. And it's a two-way street. You've got to engage with the public to have a conversation about, is this right? Are we working on the right things? Are these the things that the public cares about? Whether you're in office or running for office, that's part and parcel of the conversation.
The old saying is, it's the economy, stupid. That was the early 90s saying from the Clinton campaign.
I think so, yeah.
Providing the environment to foster the economy.
Yeah, it is. It's setting that foundation for growth in your city, right? Mm-hmm. And continual growth, right? Everybody who has a business here, we want you to be doing good. We want you to expand. And frankly, the more people you employ, that does good things for our city, right?
We've kind of highlighted a lot of issues today, but if you were to maybe leave the listener with your priorities, what would you leave the listener with?
It's a very back to basics campaign. Let's focus on public safety, affordability, and infrastructure. We're going to work on a 4-year tax freeze, and we're going to roll back the blanket rezoning because we can develop better.
That's it in a nutshell.
In a nutshell.
And if somebody wanted to learn more about you, where would they find you?
JeffDavisonYYC.com.
And you are out and about campaigning now until October 2025?
October 2025, yes.
And if people want to lend their support, you're open to that. You're also open to listening to
absolutely
ideas. And
we want to hear from people, right? This is your city. Let's make sure we're doing the right things to make everyone succeed.
I really appreciate your time today. I think that's a great conversation. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add?
No, thank you so much for having me, and appreciate the work you're doing in the community too.
Thank you very much. Hello, listeners out there. Thanks for checking out the podcast. Hopefully the episode provided some insights. If you enjoyed the show, check out trose.ca, where more episodes are yet to come. You can also subscribe to the podcast, where your token of support is much appreciated. Until next time, happy coffee drinking.